Hey there, welcome to this episode, all about BPM Sync and essentially the time stretching functions inside of the SP-404 MKII. Now, it's a clever little device, and what it does is that when you import a sample onto a pad, it analyzes that sample and calculates a BPM for you. And so whenever you're flicking through your pads, you may notice this numerical value here on the display will change, and that is what it's displaying. It's displaying the calculated BPM for your sample. So here we have 80 BPM, and I know that to be correct because I made this drum loop inside of Ableton at 80 BPM to kind of test this, put it on the SD card, imported it, and it calculated it correctly. It's an 80 BPM loop, so that's great. Now we can use our BPM Sync button here, and you'll notice that skipped to 90 BPM. If I turn it back off again, the reason for that is because our global tempo here, if we do Shift and tap tempo, you will notice the tempo for our project is set at 90 BPM. Now we have two modes here that I spoke about in the tempo modes video. So if you're unfamiliar with these, you can check that out as well. But essentially, we can do it via the project. It's kind of like a global tempo, and we'll start with that first. I'm going to leave it at 90 because that's fine. It's a new project. And if we exit this, as we BPM sync, the sample here, it changes its value because that's what it's done. It's worked out that it's a 90 BPM project, and it has essentially pitched our sample to meet the project. Really cool. If we listen to it before and after, and you can hear the difference. Of course, it sped it up. But what it did was, as it sped up, it actually changed the pitch a little bit. And that's because it's not really trying to time stretch. It's just trying to fit it to the project. Now, if you want to time stretch it and actually keep the original pitch, we can do that. If we go into pitch and speed here, and we have some information in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. If I hold down Shift here, you will see where it says vinyl, yes, and then this variation off. As we scroll through with the encoder, essentially what it's doing at the moment, it's in vinyl mode. So in vinyl mode, all it does is it changes the speed to match the project. But of course, when it changes the speed, it changes the pitch. Now, as we scroll through here, we can set this to no. And that is kind of like the first time stretching algorithm. So if we take a listen now, let's just exit again so that we can see it here. Let's do it without the BPM sync. Then turn the BPM sync on and listen to it now. You can hear that it has maintained the original pitch, but still stretched it, sped it up to fit the sample project. So really good, and it works really well. If we go back to that screen for a second and hold down Shift again, as you scroll through, there are a couple of different algorithms you can play with. So if you're familiar with Ableton, you'll know that there are different time stretching algorithms that you can, try and see what kind of result you get. Sometimes it introduces artifacts, sometimes it sounds better, depending on which one you're using. So you can play around with those and try and get different effects. Now, that's one good way of doing things. The other thing that we can do is we can actually do some time stretching to the bank. So if we come out of this mode for a second, we go back, we have our sample here. It's just back at 80 BPM because we don't have BPM sync turned on. Let's do Shift, tap tempo and pad 11 again. And this is where our tempo modes come into play. So currently this is trying to recalculate it to 90 BPM for a global tempo. If I switch mode inside of here, there's different tempo modes, what I call like bank tempo mode. We can now set varying different tempos throughout our banks and also have our sample recalculate and stretch to those banks. So it's really clever. And the way we kind of demonstrate that, so we've got 90 BPM. Let's keep that on the first bank here, bank A. On bank B, let's change this to, I don't know, let's just speed it up a little bit more. Let's make it 110 BPM will do. Let's come out of this now. And of course, we use Control 1 to make sure we were still over on that bank sort of setting. If we go back to our first bank, we need to copy our sample over into the new bank so that we can try this out. And let's have BPM Sync turned on for a second. So you can see bank A is 90 BPM. With BPM synced on, our sample is now recalculated to 90 BPM. When we want to copy a sample over into a new bank, we just press copy here, choose what we want to, send over, choose the destination. So in this case, we're going to do B, and I'm just going to do B1, it's the same pad, and then do copy. And you will notice now that with BPM Sync still on, the sample has automatically recalculated to 110 BPM here. So let's listen to it on both banks. If we listen to it here at 90, and then here, we're still using that same algorithm, but we have now set our tempo to our individual banks. So again, that could be really useful depending on, the scenario, the beat that you're working on. So essentially, that is the tempo, the BPM sync, and the kind of time stretching algorithms and options that we have available to us on the SP-404 Mark II. Catch you guys in the next episode. Take care.